It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance. My name is Brian Wilson, and as always, I have with me my beer-thirsty co-host, Andy Grabner. How you doing, Andy?
I'm pretty good, but you just lied.
You're not. Oh, you already had a beer?
No, I'm not. Well, no, that was not the lie. But as he said, as always, and unfortunately, we have rare moments where we have to record a podcast without each other.
Well, it's usually, I don't even know if there's ever been one when I did it without you. So when I'm doing it, it's as always. If I'm saying it, it's true.
In this case, it's true. You're right. Yeah.
Right? How would the computer interpret it? Anyhow, we're not here to talk about language.
No, because this could be interpreted one or the other way. It could be like
we're here to be patriotic. We're talking about flags.
Flags, yeah. Maybe how can I make now this connection from flags to feature flags? Let's just say it out loud. Feature flagging. Feature flagging has been a topic, at least from my side, for the last couple of years, because the promise of feature flags, when I first heard about the term, before that, when I developed software, I had many if statements in my code that were basically saying, if this, then do this. But if a particular Boolean variable was on, then execute a particular piece of code. This obviously matured much more than what we had back then. Some still call feature flagging glorified if statements, but to get a better description of what feature flagging is, what the state of feature flagging is, where the industry is going, we invited Ben from Flagsmith today. And Ben, thank you so much for being on the show. How are you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really good, thanks. Yeah, really good.
Yeah. Hey, so Ben, when I say glorified if statement, a feature flag is nothing else than a glorified if statement. Do you cringe? Do you feel like
no? I mean, we lean into that. I think that's the kind of the beauty of the pattern is its simplicity and its effectiveness, and how you can get such a large benefit just from the original way back in the mists of time concept of doing it. I think the big thing that changed was the idea of having those things become remotely switchable, which was, what changed from your and everyone else's back in the very early days. There wasn't a really reliable way of doing that remotely. But yeah, we definitely lean into it, and we see, the bulk of the value of the idea and the concept, and people who use Flagsmith or one of the other vendors, or even roll their own. If you can organize yourself around them and your workflows around them, then they're super powerful, and they're just Booleans yet.
Mm-hmm. So that's a good way maybe to explain kind of also the maturity and how the things has evolved, because back in the days, as I explained, right, I remember during startup with an environment variable that initialized the variable that I could access in my code. And then I basically said, hey, if true, then do this. If false, to do something else. Now, modern feature flag management, really, one of the features is that you can change these things on the fly remotely. But I believe it goes much further. You can do a lot of conditional evaluations, right? So where you can define rules. I guess you obviously, folks, if you are interested in learning more about feature flagging, there's also a lot of material out there that we will also link to. So as we go through this discussion today, and as we talk about additional content that people should look into, folks, you will find the links in the description of the podcast. Now, Ben, to hear it from your perspective, if I look at your website, it says ship faster and control releases with feature flag management. You've been doing this for quite a while, and I would just be interested now, because we've been hearing this for a while. What's the adoption? What's the real adoption of feature flagging right now out there? Because I think some people are still not comfortable with it, because changing something dynamically on the fly, which means it changes the execution of code on the fly. Just give us some confirmation. Is this things that people really doing at scale?
Yeah, I mean, 100% they are. We're constantly talking to companies of all different shapes and size. We're a commercial and open source platform, so we're getting everything from like hobbyists, people doing stuff in their basements on home labs and stuff, which it's really well suited to, all the way up to massive, huge multinational corporations, and everyone in between. I do think that the direction of travel in the last kind of 20 years, I mean, I've been writing software professionally for over 25 years now. And, that direction of travel of back then, it was like there would be this enormous amount of energy behind a single release. And, that release might stay in production for many, many months, right? Whatever you were talking about. I mean, I know it sounds kind of crazy now, but that's how software used to, well, the software that I was involved in very much used to be design built, and that was the kind of velocity of those releases. And the direction of travel ever since then has always been to collapse that time between releases. You've got the kind of the pedestal engineering teams, especially 10, 15 years ago, who were pioneering multiple releases a day. Not having, I used to work with testing teams that would be in an entire room, and there would be human beings that would just literally go through the same processes day after day, just testing that stuff. This was before all of the automated browser testing stuff. So, that's a long way of saying feature flags are a small part of that concept where, I guess back then it sounded counterintuitive to say we're going to deploy our software 12 times a day, and that's going to make it more it's going to improve quality, reduce defects, downtime, all this sort of stuff. And it does feel like it's taken decades for, especially the kind of maybe the non-engineering folk in at the seniority level of large organizations to understand that that counterintuition is actually proven again and again in all different shapes and sizes of teams to be if you can release more often, there's a general correlation between quality and how often you can release software.
Mm-hmm. Does this mean, because I think both Brian and I have a huge background in quality engineering, right? We've both been on the testing side, on the performance testing side. Before performance testing, I also did a lot of functional testing. Does this mean that with feature flags, we do no longer need those people that are doing manual testing, that are creating automated tests? Is feature flagging kind of eliminating the need for upfront testing?
No, I mean, it's definitely not a silver bullet. I think that's a little bit of that's a common. I think that's a bit of a common misconception. Sometimes people think that, at one stroke, they can, be in this new world of not having to do a bunch of stuff that is maybe not the exciting part of engineering. But that's not the case. And feature flagging also is very much one sort of component part of a whole ecosystem of tooling and infrastructure and workflows and processes that can get you to that point of fix forward, not people not knowing that a build's gone into production almost. Like, again, that sounds super counterintuitive, and the first time I heard that, however many years ago it was, I was like, this is just nuts. Like, but then you had there was a very in the UK, a challenger bank called Monzo who famously said, we've got one environment in production, we do multiple releases a day. They got a banking license, and so it's definitely part of a lot of tooling around a whole suite of stuff. Things like zero downtime deployments, things like really high quality reactive observability platforms like Dynatrace, CI, reliable, dependable CI/CD processes, being able to deploy your software without any downtime and being able to do that consistently and repeatedly. So there's a whole sort of, and I talk about this a lot. I kind of 25 years ago, you were going and racking machines into data centers that was what the engineering team had to do to get sites live. Doing a deployment without or with a few seconds of downtime was tricky, and often involved switching shells as quickly as you could to turn Apache back on or whatever. And where the industry is now, and where the discipline is now, it's kind of almost unthinkable to show someone, if I could go back to my 20-year-old self and show them what the tooling was and how much time it's freed up, how much more efficient and effective it's made teams. And feature flagging is definitely, I believe it's an important part of that, but it's definitely not a silver bullet. I mean, Flagsmith itself has a very comprehensive end-to-end, front-end set of tests, a huge amount of server-side tests, and it's all about the increase in quality that it gives you, and the increase in work efficiency, developer productivity. So there's a bunch of stuff going on, but a lot of this stuff is not about tooling or software or infrastructure either. A lot of it is about people and workflows, and I would say that the pull request page of GitHub is probably as important invention as anything else. And that's anyone could write a pull request page, right? Like, it's just a bunch of comments and stuff. So yeah, it's definitely, I find it quite interesting, because it's not just technology, it's people and processes and opinions and politics and a lot of that stuff. And that's why it's quite interesting working with different types of organizations. Some of them very kind of like classically slow moving, non-engineering industry organizations and things like that. And they're very much a lot of the time, progressive and trying to get to that point, but it's just because of their size. That's a 10-year program kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for all this background. And I think, as you mentioned, feature flags is just a technical detail on how we need to change the way we think about releasing software, right? It's about decoupling the deployment from the release. I think this was a big thing for me. Still, some of the questions are, how do you still test? Coming back to the testing aspect, how do you test that you're deploying something new and the feature flags are all turned off? That still you actually made the right, you put the right code behind the feature flag and you don't miss anything. Also, if you have cross dependencies between feature flags, I think these are still some challenges. There might be tooling around it to figure out if the cross dependencies are not a challenge. But overall, it's just a technical detail on how to implement the feature flag. It means more about how you're changing your development process and your release process. And I really like your example with the analogy with the pull request page, right? Because the pull request page is a very simple page, but it changes completely the way
exactly
you think about the software delivery process. And I think that's a spot on analogy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and almost all tooling has been going in that direction, right? Like observability platforms, source code control and management, deployment, they've all been moving in that direction. And they're all important. And they can all play well together. But just to go back to your point about whether how you do testing with like cross-dependent flags. Again, like these things are just tools, and anyone can you can misuse tools. So thinking about making flags that are kind of functional, right? In a way that if you had a purely functional language that only takes inputs and outputs and can't mutate the state of the rest of the program. Quite often, we generally recommend people think about feature flags in the same way, and so that's one of the reasons why we're really great proponents of using them, particularly on the front end as well, because it's much easier to make a feature flag kind of purely functional in that it's not going to have any knock-on effects on other parts of the application if you're just removing a menu item or showing an additional option or something like that. So like all these things, by itself, Git doesn't do anything, right? Like, and you can tie yourself into knots using a version control system or using a CI/CD platform or using feature flags. And so a lot of what we work on is it's not, I wouldn't describe it as consultancy, but definitely like speaking to customers, finding out how they're using the product, how big their teams are, whether the teams have cross dependencies, they have microservice architecture or monoliths and all this sort of stuff, whether they have a mono repository, because all those things feed into and can give people an idea of what the best way of using flags are. Is really common as well for us to help teams just get started, get that first feature out that they've gated through a flag and turned on in production through a flag. That's obviously, especially from a people point of view, that can be a lot of work, can be challenging. It can mean, it can even mean at the most extreme level, organizations changing their policy on what they define as a release, right? Like a good example is financial services in the EU. There needs to be, there's an amount of regulation about when you change your application or your application behavior, who's allowed to change that, what sign off you need to do that. And obviously introducing feature flags can then blur that quite a lot. So, you could even be getting to the point where just using the pattern requires you to, get board level sign off on, right, we're going to change our sort of engineering policy around this. So it's once you get the first deployment under your belt, then it's a case of like, right, how can the rest of the team use this? How can the server side engineering team use this? And how can the SREs use this? And how can the mobile app teams use this? And again, like most tools, they can be overused. We've seen deployments with hundreds and hundreds or thousands of flags, and sometimes it's just a little bit crazy. Actually, if you open your Chrome browser, I think it's and you go to Chrome //flags, you can see how many feature flags are available in the Chrome browser, and there's many. Yeah. Obviously, that's an incredibly complicated piece of software, but it's different. Like all these tools, how you use them depends on who you are and what you want to get out of them. And there's no real rules for everybody that work for everybody, really.
Yeah. Hey, as you mentioned, this use case with the regulations. So obviously, you have the need as an organization, let's say in the EU, to change certain rules at midnight because then a new law gets into effect and only certain people are allowed to make this change. Thinking broader, if I have a handful of feature flags, how do I make sure that I also know exactly at which point in time which feature flag was active and also evaluate it? Because in the end, feature flag is like configuration change. And so I always want to make sure if something breaks or if I get an audit, right? If I get an audit by the European Union, I need to make sure to explain that 1 hour before midnight, this code was really not executed, but at midnight, this code got executed. And the term SBOM also comes into mind, like the software bill of materials. Is this where the whole feature flag configuration also becomes part of your SBOM, or how does this work? Do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. I mean, for sure, all of engineering's trade-offs, and you are trading off some aspects of, reproducibility and understandability in the edge cases of, bugs, or, which line of code was lit, which code path was lit at, 9:57 last night because, something happened. There was some, I don't know, security vulnerability or something like that. And this is kind of, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, actually. I've kind of come up with this concept that we talk about flags just being Booleans, but enterprise software, it needs this very large, wide, heavy stuff around it, right? Like it needs audit logs, and it needs different forms of authentication, and it needs integration with different types of, enterprise systems, and it needs fine-grained access controls and all of this sort of stuff. Or, and it doesn't matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter whether you're just doing feature flags, or if you're building a platform of the scope of Dynatrace or GitLab or something like that. They all need all of that stuff around them to be able to, for us, when we're selling into large enterprises, those, there's, as you, I'm sure you've seen the 500 question Excel spreadsheets of, what's your SSL certificate policy and what authentication mechanisms do you have and all this sort of stuff. And so a lot of what we've been working on in the last couple of years has been answering questions like that. So you've got this is where we can sort of talk about OpenFeature, OpenTelemetry, and being able to so this idea that you're right, you're completely right, your flag state for that user or that session at that moment in time is part of your configuration bill of materials, whatever. It's what you need to be able to reconstruct. If you need to go back and look at what happened, why some error was thrown or exception was thrown, why it was thrown, and it does become part of that black box of all of that stuff that you'd expect to get in a trace. And so things like integrating into OpenTelemetry, so those flag states that particular mobile application had in memory at that time become part of a trace. And so you can say, okay, we turned on this feature midnight last night because we left the European Union or something equally annoying, and we had to change. The regulation changed and the law changed, and we had to do something. And so that's something that you can use a flag management platform like Flagsmith or one of the other vendors to do, is to say, right, at this point in time, at 11:59, I want this flag to be false, and at 12 midnight, I want it to be true. And so that's obviously needs to be stored somewhere. You need to be able to recover that in an audit log or a trace or something like that, so you can understand it. And so so a lot of the work that we've been doing on Flagsmith, it's kind of the developer experience probably hasn't moved much in the last couple of years, because it doesn't need to, because that stuff kind of is there and works. And a lot of the stuff we've been doing is around things like integrations with OpenTelemetry or Grafana or something like that, where those more unusual, difficult questions of what was the state of the application for this user at this point in time, we can give a good answer to that. Yeah,
and for me, it was a nice segue, because initially when we talked years ago, right, the reason why we were enriching distributed traces with feature flag information was mainly for troubleshooting purposes and for reporting purposes. That means how many people were now seeing the new feature, and did this have any positive or negative impact, or did it fail? And if so, was it because of this feature flag, yes or no? So we're enriching distributed traces and maybe logs with this information. The additional use case that I now see is the whole compliance use case. If compliance is the right word, I think it is the right word, that you can prove now with a distributed trace that is enriched with feature flag information that a certain user was served a result with this feature flag turned on to enforce a certain new, let's say, regulation. Yeah. And I think it's not only with regulatory bodies. I believe also in the e-commerce space, if you think about a new launch of an iPhone, I'm pretty sure all the vendors have a certain contract that they are only allowed to put the iPhone out there at a particular point in time. Nobody can sell earlier, or tickets or something like this, right? And so the trace becomes even more important because you can also use this to prove that you have done your job right, that you are within your contractual obligations. And I never thought about this until you just mentioned this, because this
it's funny you mentioned the iPhone one, because there's always one vendor in one country that presses the button and does it like 24 hours too early, and then everyone's got the specs, and then they're obviously never going to be able to buy anything from Apple ever again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really, especially with distributed systems, ironically, that's gone from a very easy problem to solve to a quite hard one. It used to be like, well, just turn that version of the site off and bring that version of the site up and restart Apache. That's how you used to do that 20 years ago. But with more distributed systems now, it becomes an increasingly non-trivial thing to solve, for sure. Without flags, that is, right?
Yeah. You brought up OpenFeature in conversation earlier. OpenFeature is an open source, a CNCF project that was launched, I think it's like 3 years ago now, at KubeCon Valencia, between a couple of organizations, including Dynatrace. You were also one of the early adopters in supporting OpenFeature. Just like for a clarification perspective, because I sometimes also see this, that people get the difference wrong between OpenTelemetry and an observability platform. OpenTelemetry is a framework that standardizes the way you're collecting data, but it's not an observability platform. You still need to send this data to some place to then analyze it. And the same is true with OpenFeature. OpenFeature is a standard that allows developers to put in feature flags in their code without the, let's say, link to a vendor implementation. But still, OpenFeature on its own doesn't do anything without a backend. Right? And there might be open source backend implementations, and the same is true for open source observability platforms that can consume OpenTelemetry data, but you still need that backend. Is there anything, first of all, clarification? Did I miss anything to explain?
That was a great summary. Yeah. I mean, I think the original goal, I think, really back in the early day was to try and design an interface standard for the SDKs so that it was easy to, well, not just to switch provider, but also to be able to swap out like flag provider implementation. So just to give people a good example of that, if you're wanting to run isolated unit tests that don't have external dependent, say you don't want them to have external network dependencies, being able to swap out a real-time flag provider like Flagsmith with, say, a flat file of flag values, right? That you want to run your unit and integration tests against. That's something that is a very reasonable thing to expect and to ask for from a feature flagging platform. And one of the things that we kind of underestimated when we started the project was how much energy that those SDKs would consume, and the expectations of quality and capability of those SDKs. And as a small team, it was very difficult for us to, people would come to us and say, I want to be able to swap out my Rust SDK with some static flags, and it's like, well, that's reasonable, but we've only got a finite amount of engineering resource, and so OpenFeature, as well as being able to provide a common interface standard that people can write their code to and be able to swap out providers, it also adds a load of flexibility. That the static file unit testing is a good example of that. But then one of the other great things about it is, because it's not the flag implementation itself, it still needs the Flagsmith SDK or the Launch Darkly SDK or whatever. There's parts of that runtime that it has access to, that means that it can do things like send that trace into OpenTelemetry without us as Flagsmith, as a vendor, having to do that. So for us being able to write those adapters for the different languages to plug our SDKs into OpenFeature, some days I wake up in the morning and look at the OpenFeature repository and it's like, this language OpenFeature SDK has suddenly acquired this new capability because someone in the community implemented it. And if you're using Flagsmith as a provider, you get that for free, we get that for free. And it's like a perfect example of how like open source makes the world go round. So there's a bunch of stuff there that especially for a relatively small team like ours, is just super great. And we just believe that the core philosophy of the project is right. This is a perfect example of where standards are. I mean, it's not. Standards in as I would describe it as just ones that generally become, the kind of lingua franca of dealing with flags. And so, it's been great to watch it grow and to see the capabilities of it grow. And also, you were asking about where feature flagging is in terms of its sort of its journey and its maturity, and the sorts of things that we're talking about within the open feature community are probably a good proxy of where that is, because the questions are becoming much more specific around like observability, around driving and reporting, A/B testing and things like that. And so it's kind of in the same way that Flagsmith went through that maturity of just being able to just do flags, and then to be able to take it to become more enterprise rich, or be able to drive and integrate with say A/B testing platforms or A/B testing data stores. OpenFeature is going through that same process, but it's kind of a little bit more difficult in that regard, because I think there's definitely, we talk about this a lot within the OpenFeature team, trying to decide where the boundary ends, because that's a super critical design decision for the project, and when to say that's out of our remit, that's there's another project that would be more relevant for that, or that's just not relevant. So to get into that is definitely the first couple of years of the project. There was just a ton of work to do, and it was all very easy decisions and easy choices, almost non-choices really, in that this just needs to exist. And you maybe argue a little bit about specific schema things or what have you, but now it's getting to the kind of like the interesting questions of like, should we support A/B testing, and to what degree should we support it? And also the technical solutions become more complicated, because there's different opinions about how you should do that sort of thing, and all sorts of stuff. But it's been super valuable experience for me, watching that project grow, for sure.
I have a kind of like a final thought or final question or area that I want to go towards the end of the podcast, which is, and maybe I misheard you earlier, but I think what you said is that feature flagging technically, right? It's a solved problem technically. Technically, we have simple feature flags. We have with complex evaluations, you can do all sorts of things. We have the auditing. Yes, as a feature flag management vendor, you have certain integrations you need to build, but feature flagging itself, it's a solved problem. Does this mean that innovation is kind of, from a tooling perspective, technology perspective, getting towards an end? But is this the chance? Because you said earlier you're now doing a lot of consulting. You don't want to call yourselves consultants, but you're really advocating and helping large organizations to really change the way they do software development and delivery. Is this the next evolutionary step? So we have the technicalities down, and now it's about really helping organizations to adopt this technology. It's like going back 20, 30 years. We had unit testing frameworks, but the frameworks on its own, they don't do anything. You need to teach developers how to do test-driven development. Is this where we are?
I mean, I think that's a great analogy actually, because you're right. Like, I don't know how old JUnit is. It's got to be 20 years old, right? And
at least, yeah.
It's still, not uncommon to. I mean, well, actually, really, really common. Flagsmith came out of an agency that I was running, and from time to time, we do help companies through software audits, security audits, technical audits, things like that. And I mean, even in large banks, I won't name any names for certain, but it's really, really, really kind of uncommon to find software projects with good unit test coverage, right? Like. And, if you're writing some little side project on a weekend, then fine. But if you're writing some, KYC workflows for a bank, then you'd probably want to have unit tests. And so, yeah, I think it's a great analogy. It's kind of unit tests. Unit tests are a little bit like brushing your teeth, right? Like So when you're a kid, you should do it. You don't want to. You don't really get any benefit out of it, but it's just something that you know that is a good idea. Feature flags are kind of a little bit more interesting because they're more obvious in their payback for engineering teams, right? Like I can put this thing, but if I'm waiting for someone, or waiting for another team, or waiting for a microservice to finish this bit of work and it's going to take them a week, I can put my stuff behind a flag, push it live, get on with my life and go and do the next thing, right? Unit tests don't really give you that like immediate kind of like sort of win of like, right, I can just do that, or if I need to turn this feature off in Australia or Canada, then I can do that really quite easily with feature flags. But I do think that, yeah, you're definitely right. Like as a it's kind of like an advocacy thing now, almost more than, how do they work? How do you do them? Most engineers now, even if they've not used them themselves, when we do a walkthrough of the platform, there's nothing like, oh, I didn't, there's no like, oh my God, I didn't expect it to do that, right? It's like, yeah, that's all fairly obvious. There's an SDK and an API key and all this sort of stuff. And so the interesting thing about that is that when it comes to advocacy, everyone in that industry is pulling in the same direction, right? Like we're advocating it, and our competitors are advocating it, and OpenFeature is advocating it, and all this stuff. And so that kind of makes life a little bit less kind of competitive, and in a way, because like everyone's kind of pulling in the same direction. And a lot of this boils down to this is one of the questions that obviously we'll never get an answer to, but we're always debating within Flagsmith, is what percentage of active software projects in the world are currently using some form of, either feature flags or feature flag like stuff, right? If you were to squint, you'd go, yeah, that's a feature flag. And I don't know, we don't know what that number is, but I still think it's low double digits, right? Like quite very low double digits. So that's kind of like how we perceive it at the time, really. And I do think conceptually and in terms of feature set, most of the platforms out there are, they might do things slightly differently. They might have slightly different concepts around certain different things, but they're generally all doing pretty much the same thing. As far as engineers are concerned. So yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely at that point in the maturity curve where it's as much about advocacy, use cases that as it is around, like we're always trying to make the platform lower latency and more reliable and all this sort of stuff. And make things like unit testing easier and quality of life stuff for engineers, rather than like, there's this like version, we're currently on version 2 dot whatever, and I can't imagine ever there being a 3, right? Like unless we change the versioning system, which maybe we'll do for that reason. Yeah.
No, but it kind of also proves the point that I made earlier, right? I think you've reached kind of like almost technical completeness. There's always certain things you need to do, but the big hurdle now is to advocate, and it seems the whole industry is advocating for this. It's the same that we are advocating for observability driven development, right? You need to from the start understand and have a strategy on how to observe your software, and you need to define what makes your software healthy or unhealthy. Because if you don't do this, patching it later on is not easy, and it's just like flying blind. And the same is true with feature flags. Feature flag driven development is something that we'll probably see going forward. Yeah. We are almost at the end, and Brian, I haven't heard much of you today. You've just been sitting there and listening and sucking and soaking everything in.
Sorry. No, there were several questions I was going to ask that then got answered there. But I guess the final question I have, right? So this is the scenario I can imagine. I imagine it's pretty easy to get set up and running on initial feature flags, right? But as my mind works is the more I start thinking about it, the deeper I start thinking about it. It's like, well, what should we do as a feature flag? What should we not do as a feature flag? When you start thinking about dependency and then maybe even feature flag debt and all these other things, my mind starts, going out of control. So what is there out there for people who are looking to go do feature flags? Is it like consulting services that companies like Flagsmith offer, or you hire a consultant, or is it just communities? Like, how do people learn to grow and mature with feature flags so that they don't, dig themselves in a hole they can't get out of later?
Yeah, that's a good question. We don't offer consulting services, as a standalone thing. We have like customer success folk who, help our customers. And then we have like a Discord community where, every now and again, like people will drop in and go and ask a question related to that. There is some tooling around it that's fairly common amongst providers. So for example, being able to label flags as like permanent. So you might, there are some use cases of flags where they are going to live for the lifetime of the project. And then there's generally providers have tooling around like stale flags. So if a flag is in Flagsmith anyway, I can talk to Flagsmith. If a flag's not marked as permanent, but it hasn't had a state change for a particular amount of time, I can't remember exactly how long it is at the moment. You can get a list of, right, like these flags no one's touched them for like 6 months, and they're not permanent, or you haven't marked them as permanent. And so that's probably, that's a smell, and that's definitely engineering smell there that you're like, go and figure out. And then, again, like, you can associate flags with team members in Flagsmith. So you can go, this flag, Andy created this flag like 2 years ago. No one's touched it for a year. It's in this report. I'm going to ask him, like, what happened? And go, that went live like 18 months ago. I just completely forgot about it. It's fine. Like, we'll put it in the next pull request. We'll just, turn that on, and we can remove the flag. So there is some amount of tooling around that, but I'm going to repeat myself again. These things are kind of like societal as much as as tooling, getting into that habit of part of your development cycle being what's in that stale flags list. Having the lovely thing about pull requests and being able to deploy software whenever you want is that you can just do these little rhythms all the time. And engineer and flags help you increase that rhythm. One of the things that they add to, and you sort of get used to doing once you start using them, is write the feature, write the unit tests, get it into production, and then a month later or 2 weeks later or whatever, remove the flag and just remove the conditional from your code, kind of thing. And it's when you get that additional step as part of your workflow, that it just becomes part of that kind of housekeeping that you do. And people might be thinking, oh God, that's the last thing I want is another kind of thing. And I think actually I'm not massively into the kind of AI hype train. I know it's kind of a bit more fashionable now to be in that camp, but that would be a great, I'm sure we're pretty close to having Claude or Gemini or whatever, GPT, being able to look at, in the same way that they're really good at writing pull request summaries now. That's a great use case for AI. Just go like, right, yeah, I can understand Flagsmith's state. I can see your code. I can see all the changes that are going through there. Andy's flag hasn't changed for a year and a half. Here's the pull request to remove that flag. And then here's the, API or Terraform script to turn that off in Flagsmith. Like, that's definitely, I'm on that AI train, definitely. Like that sounds like a great thing, and probably, yeah. We're probably there in terms of the abilities of the LLMs now. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, great to end it on a hype topic. And
God, no, I wasn't gonna. I said I'm not gonna mention AI this hour, but I just did.
No. And I think it will also make a good soundbite. I took a couple of notes today throughout the presentation on which soundbites to use, but maybe this one in the end is the one that we will pick. Ben, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's always amazing how fast the time flies. And I know we will see each other most likely at KubeCon in London, or at least
sure.
we'll figure out a way to meet there. Will Flagsmith be there as well, like with a booth?
We'll definitely have some folk there. The KubeCon booths are not the cheapest in the world, so we're not exhibiting, but we will be there in body and spirit, just not in cold hard cash, I guess.
Yeah. Maybe you will. Maybe people will find you around the OpenFeature booth, because they will have the project pavilion there.
Yeah, so there is definitely that's been another thing. Just to add, it's been great to see the sort of evolution of OpenFeature in the context of KubeCon, and there are like significant things going on OpenFeature related in KubeCon. I guess that, if you're interested in terms of like hacking on the project, working on the SDKs, getting advice on the best way to use the tool. So yeah, check out the KubeCon agenda, because there's significantly more open feature related stuff there than there has been in the past. Yep.
Yeah, and if you get your people at KubeCon to just wear top to bottom Flagsmith logos and everything, they can just be a mobile booth. You know, you can even have iPads or whatever, or tablets on their chest so they can demonstrate, right? You don't need to be stationary. Work the system. All right. Anyway, thank you so much for being on the show. I really, really appreciate it. This was fascinating.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
And we look forward to hearing what comes of this in the future. Glad to hear you said you're all in on AI for everything. And thanks everyone for listening. Talk to you soon.
You.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.